Hello, and welcome to today's session on the benefits of hybrid environments, connecting the on-premise world to Azure. So I am your presenter for today. My name is Nick Velich, and I run the consulting services team here at Cireson. If you're unfamiliar, my team helps to deliver IT asset management, service management, automation, systems integration, ITIL process, all kinds of fun stuff to our customers around the globe. So I'm excited here to share some of the cool things that we've kind of got to play with in recent days, and ways that we can connect that on-premise stuff to Azure. So before we get started today, I do want to cover on some housekeeping items for Innovate 2021 in general. So first of all, just a reminder that all sessions are recorded and they will be delivered to you after today's conference. So if you join late or you miss something, got to step away, it's all good. I'll be there for you to check out afterwards. Also, wanted to mention that today's session is recorded. The lot of reasons for that, but first and foremost, the demo is very Azure centric, and if you've played with Azure enough, sometimes you'll realize that things take a little long to process. So a couple minutes between each step doesn't make for the best demo to watch loading bars. So hopefully that's appreciated, but doesn't take away from the fun, because I will be in the lounge after today's session to do live Q&A. So if you've got questions now during the session, feel free to jot them down in the Q&A area here, or save them and ask them in person just after. So again, 30 minutes after the session, I'll be in there answering any of your questions, or maybe just stop by to say hey. Also, on that same note, we have a lounge open all day. So that's going to be staffed by support from my team and other of my colleagues here at Cireson. Just feel free to stop by, say hey. If you have a question, we're there to help you get through, answer whatever questions you might have. So please stop by and give us a visit. Okay. Now with housekeeping kind of out of the way, let's talk about today's session and what we're going to be covering here. So, in the consulting world, we want to be trying to solve problems, right? So what is the problem we're trying to solve today? The problem we're trying to solve is, organizations. They've got a mixture. Unless you're a brand new organization, for the most part, you probably have a cloud premise and an on-premise premise. So getting those systems to talk, when there's a need for some interaction between them, that can be kind of a challenge. So there's not necessarily a streamlined way for some on-premise resource to talk to those cloud resources, or to integrate between one system and another. So how exactly do we get these to kind of talk in a more streamlined, unified way? So monitoring and responding to logs perhaps that those on-premise applications generate, and doing something with something valuable with that log data, with that alert. So we're gonna try to solve that problem today. Find a way to get these systems to talk in a more reusable and affordable way. That becomes conversation number one usually when talking about Azure is what is it going to cost, and if unmanaged can get really crazy. So definitely something to keep in the forefront. We'll cover on that coming up here as well. So we want to rebuild something that can be reused, that's affordable, that solves those problems, that breaks down those barriers between systems, especially on-premise and cloud systems. So along similar lines, our objectives. How are we going to go about doing this? We want to implement a solution. It has to be easy, has to be affordable. We want to get the data that these applications generate, this log data that they generate, to be in one location. Many of these applications do create log data, and so just getting that log data to one place, checkpoint number one. Once everything's in one kind of similar place, consolidated, we can, respond to that data the same no matter what the application is. So once we get that data centralized, we will interact with it in a few ways. We certainly don't want to collect data just to collect data. We want to collect data with purpose. Because if we have something we need to report on, or we have something that we need to respond to, we're going to collect the data for it and only that data. So we will go through, we'll want to create reports on that data. We'll want to create alerts, so maybe an email alert. We will want to collaborate, so maybe a Teams message or a Slack message to talk about that particular log message that was collected and what maybe, if anything, we need to do about it. And we'll also want to create work items in our ITSM ticketing solution. So Service Manager, ServiceNow, whatever platform you use, you want to make sure that that if there's something you need to take action on, it's in that ticketing system. The ticketing system is where work should start for most of your users. It's your analyst users. It's where they track their to-do list, so to speak. It's where they prioritize one item against another. So getting all this information into one of those systems is critical to help those analysts kind of with their day-to-day, but also it gives you a more full picture of, it gives management a more full picture of where's time going. What systems are we spending most of IT's time and therefore dollars on? So getting that, getting this ultimately connected to that system, that ITSM system is super important. Okay, so the solution we're going to build today, we are going to build, the first component of that solution is going to be an on-premise agent. So the agent we'll cover in a moment, but it's called the Log Analytics Agent, aka the Microsoft Monitoring Agent. So this is the agent that sits on your on-premise server and sends data to Azure. And so where does it send it? It sends it to the next component, which is your workspace in Azure that's going to hold that data, centralize that data. Log Analytics Workspace is the name of that particular repository. So we're going to talk through, how to navigate around log analytics and where the data goes and how can you actually use it and get value out of it. Because again, we want to get value out of whatever we are doing here. Some use case, some business case has to drive this. In that log analytics workspace, we will also talk about how do you get data out. So how do you find the data, but how do you get it out as well? The last thing we want is another native tool that we don't necessarily have in-house skill set to support. We want to make sure that, maybe we have business analysts that are really good at Power BI. Well, how do we get the data in their hands so that they can run with it and do what they need to do with that data? So we'll show how to make that happen, get the data out, and let your business analysts be off to the races with it. The solution we're going to build today, we're also going to deal with response. So getting data collected and building reports is great if you need to pull that information, but if you're kind of more of a, more proactive and analysis driven, right? But for alerts, it's more reactive. We've gotten a particular log message maybe that we need to respond to, that we need to act on right now. How do we make that happen? So we'll make that happen. We'll show kind of where you can do that through email alerts. First and foremost, easiest thing to do, but also can be noisy. So the last thing we want here as well is another dozen notifications to go out to certain analysts and have them be ignored. If you go crazy with email alerts, they become counterproductive. And I think everyone on the call has probably dealt with kind of email noise at one point or another. So what else can we do if we don't want to, it's a great starting point, email is, but what if we want to take a step further and do something a little bit more that we can collaborate on a little bit better? And so that's where we could talk about webhooks into solutions like Teams or Slack. That's kind of where a better space to have a conversation. So maybe post a message that says this alert was found and let's talk about it. Let's figure out what has to be done. So we'll also in our solution we'll talk about how to integrate into some other areas. So I touched on it earlier, but how to create a work item in something like Service Manager. or other IT tools. And again, we want to make this happen. Audit, compliance, very important to have that in one space. And then just in general, all work being in one spot helps a lot from a prioritization standpoint and just tracking collaboration standpoint. If you have an unassigned tickets queue, knowing that someone else has grabbed that and is actively working on it is tremendously helpful. So we'll also talk about some of the more automated things you can do. So we'll see a Runbook actually in action that kicks off to go and just try to automate a solution. Perhaps maybe this doesn't even need to be a ticket necessarily, or maybe it's only a ticket if our resolution fails. So we'll talk about, we'll show where you can integrate systems like Azure Automation, functions, so forth. So then the solution again that we built today, we're going to kind of keep in the forefront that whatever we build, it's going to need to be expanded upon and that reused. So other systems that get in here, we want to be able to react to it in the same way and try to not reinvent the wheel as much as possible. Okay, so before we get into the weeds with the actual solution, I want to take a kind of a pause here to talk about terminology. So a terminology jam session, if you will. So the technology we're going to go through today that we're going to see here, Azure Monitor, Log Analytics Agent, so forth. It's gone through quite a few changes over the years. It happens. Certain things move around, components move around, get renamed for sometimes technical reasons, sometimes marketing reasons, but it can end up being very confusing, especially if your starting point, like mine often is to read through some blogs and so forth about the technology and about the solutions that folks have put together and try to get a handle for kind of how it all fits. If you're looking at a blog from 3 years ago, it's probably going to be referring to it with some older names and some rebranded items that have moved around. A lot of the functionality still exists if you do happen to find one of those older kind of blogs or videos like this, I suppose. So just keep in mind that this has changed quite a bit, but it all translates for the most part. Azure seems to go through a facelift every year or so, and get navigation changes very slightly. So it usually translates though. So this is really no different. So in short, so there is a link here if you want to read up on that history a little bit better to understand how references here and so forth have changed. But in short, the technology we're seeing today, it all started as the Operations Management Suite, so OMS for short. And that was actually it was outside of Azure at one point. It was its separate own little product. And that was eventually brought into Azure and it was consolidated. And so it was consolidated into Azure Monitor. So all that functionality in OMS came into that new space. So Azure Monitor, and I like to think of Azure Monitor more as kind of the how are we collecting, what are our rules, how are we going out and what are we getting, how are we getting it, whatever those rules kind of dictate, at the end of the day, you're collecting data, and that data goes into a Log Analytics Workspace. So Log Analytics Workspace is where you're going to be, querying your data, analyzing your data. Your data is stored there, so you're going to potentially also alert on that data: email, Teams, Slack, ITSM system, automation, so forth. So that all is kind of attached to your Log Analytics Workspace. To make matters a little bit more confusing, Log Analytics is sometimes referred to as Azure Monitor Logs. So if you see that, don't get too frightened by it. Microsoft actually calls that out in the article. So just keep in mind, Log Analytics Workspace, it's where our data is. Azure Monitor is more of the how and what are we collecting kind of element. Okay, so with all that out of the way, let's get into the weeds here and let's talk about the first component of our solution today, the Log Analytics Agent. So this is, if you're an SCSM admin or SCOM admin, this is the Microsoft Monitoring Agent you know and love. And speaking of terminology, this has been renamed as well. So the Microsoft Monitoring Agent, uh, been around for quite a while, 15 plus years, I believe, and even that's been renamed. But this is already going to be installed in all likelihood on your servers. So if you're using SCOM to monitor your servers, this is how those servers talk. So it's already installed on there. If you're not using SCOM, it's a simple install. Microsoft has links to it actually right in the Log Analytics Workspace if you wanted to pull that down and install it on a new server that wasn't monitored already by SCOM. If you are installing this on an SCSM server, it is already installed. So it's actually the same monitoring agent between SCOM and SCSM that gets installed. So it might already be there. There might be nothing for you to install, which hopefully makes adoption of such a tool a little bit easier. Other quick kind of note on terminology is this agent is going to be renamed again. So I think back in March or so, early Q1 this year, Microsoft announced a new Azure Monitor agent, which again consolidates a couple different agent functionalities into one. And so this isn't like what you're seeing today isn't going away, but it might be called something different when that feature is currently in preview. So when it comes out of preview, I believe is when they're planning to consolidate it. But who knows? Like it's in preview, it could fizzle out or it could change again. So keep an eye on that. There's a link here as well if you want to keep up to date with the Azure Monitor agent, the news. So all the same thing though. When we talk about these agents, they're all what we're using is all the same. There's of course more functionality outside of what we're seeing. But it's not relevant to the demo today. The other quick note, this agent is compatible. I often get kind of concerned from customers about, even with just SCOM and SCSM, like agent compatibility and so forth. It is entirely compatible. It's just a different tab in the Microsoft Monitoring Agent configuration page. So you can have this talk to SCOM on premise. You can have this talk to Azure Log Analytics Workspace. You can actually have it talk to multiple Log Analytics Workspaces if you want. So that's all fair game. So all compatible might be there, and configuration is not too bad, which leads me into our demo. So we're going to actually take a moment now to look at the Log Analytics agent that's installed on premise, and we're going to talk about kind of how to configure that agent and then we'll see later on kind of some of those other pieces from a configuration standpoint. Okay, so we're going to start by going to a server where we want to have the agent installed or have the agent installed and click on Microsoft Monitoring Agent. And here on this page, we have a very familiar configuration kind of page where Operations Manager is going to be configured on this first tab. So you would punch in your management group for SCOM here, and then this is kind of how those two servers would communicate. Now this is independent of what we're setting up today. What we're more interested in for today is the second tab, the Azure Log Analytics. So I click on that tab, and right off the bat, I kind of have a callback here to the terminology jam session we had a few minutes ago. So you already see right here, this is called OMS. You still see some of that original OMS branding here that hopefully helps out track better some of the changes that have been made. So we see down here, the Microsoft Monitoring Agent has successfully been connected. So we have a good connection there to our Log Analytics Workspace. You'll want to look for a message like that after you get this configured. It takes just a moment. Usually it's pretty quick to make that connection. If you were going to add a new workspace, you would click the Add button, punch in a workspace ID and a key, and of course, pick Azure Commercial or Government, depending on your situation. And that's really all there is to it. It's pretty simple setup, just a workspace ID and key, and you're connected. And we'll look in the next demo as to where to actually find this workspace ID and key that's going to come from the Log Analytics Workspace you're looking to connect to. Okay, so now we've seen kind of where to configure your log analytics workspace on your on-premise server, we need to actually take a look at where is that pointing to? The data that you collect, where is it going to go? And so that's where the log analytics workspace comes into play. So again, this log analytics workspace, this is your repository for the data you collect using that log analytics agent we just saw. So we're going to set up our full log analytics workspace. We're going to set up collection rules in our log analytics workspace. So this is going to say, hey, I want you to collect, this particular log at this particular path. I want you to collect all event log data, system log data. I want you to collect disk, CPU, memory, performance data. There's all sorts of stuff you can collect out of box, even IIS, believe some SQL stuff as well. There's all sorts of out-of-box rules that you can configure, and then the custom rules is really what makes it a compelling solution, in my opinion, because these different, Microsoft's not going to be able to cover, compatibility with every piece of on-premise software you have out there. So then the general rule becomes, if that on-premise piece of software spits out a log data anywhere on that server, we can integrate. We can integrate the log analytics and collect the data that we need to collect. So that becomes a really compelling part of this solution in that if there's a file, it can go into Azure, and all with that simple agent we just looked at. So when you first start with your log analytics workspace, you're going to need to be very strategic. So you're going to need to, make sure you're not just, there's a lot you can get. I just kind of went over. You don't want to just get all of that data. If you do that, you're going to end up in a situation where you have way more data than you're ever going to need to react to or report on or anything, and your bill is going to run up high. It's going to be very expensive very quickly if you do that. So I say again, only collect the data that you need. If you've got a business case to connect a system, ask the why. Why do we need that system? What are we going to do with the data when we collect it? And only collect what you need to accomplish that business case. And it might sound obvious, might not, but at the end of the day, make sure you're not collecting more than you need. The pricier the solution, it won't stick around for long. So once you get the data, again, strategize. Once you get the data in here that you need, this is where you'll query it. This is where you'll analyze it. And so forth. This is where you'll get the actual value. All the hard work to connect and get the data in there. This is where you see it. This is where you do something with it. So we'll get into the demo here now again. So in the last demo, we saw briefly a workspace ID and a key, and now you get that from your log analytics workspace. So we're going to go take a look at that workspace, and we're going to show you where to grab that information. And then we're going to look at configuring log collection rules. So we'll look at a custom rule, and we'll look at some event rules as well as some performance rules. Okay, so over in our log analytics workspace, we're here on the overview page. We're going to go ahead and configure our collection settings. So on the agents management tab, we can see first and foremost that one computer is connected there at the top. And we can see the workspace ID and key that we were just looking at in the last demo. So all you have to do is copy this here, punch it in to the configuration page you just looked at. And like I said, you'll see this one computer connected once you have a successful connection to this workspace. And keep these keys private as well. Of course, breaking that rule, having them shown here in the demo, but the workspace, of course, has been decommissioned long before this aired here. So yeah, definitely keep those on hand. Just these 2 bits you need. Make sure to get the right agent if you need it. You can see a couple downloads there as well. That's referring to the log analytics agent I mentioned before. So if you don't have SCOM installed, you don't have Service Manager installed on the server, you're trying to monitor, this is where you can download a quick installer to get that up and running. Okay, so now that we have our computer connected and so forth to this workspace, we're going to want to set up some collection rules. So as of right now, no data is being collected. there's just a successful connection. So I click on Advanced Settings, and I'm going to click on the Data tab here. And I'm going to first show you some custom logs. So I can click on Custom Logs, and what I have set up here is a custom log file named Cireson logs, and then there's an _CL, which is pretty much a default that Log Analytics does for you to let you know it's a custom log. And so we're going to take a look at this particular log file here in a second. So it's just kind of a simulated log file that writes a log on premise. It simulates kind of an application you have on premise writing out any of its various logs. So on the left here, I've got a PowerShell script. It's really just generating a date, the host name, error, kind of a sample error message. I'm going to run it a few times. And this log file, pretty much what you expect: date, timestamp, server name, error, maybe warning, info, and then just kind of a log message. So this is the data I'm going to send back to Azure. So back in Azure, I also want to show you kind of what it will look like to configure this from scratch, just showing you what's already kind of being fed up into my Log Analytics workspace here. So I'm going to start by clicking on Add, then I'm going to choose a file. So I need a sample of that file. So I double click that sample, click Next, and then I have my record delimiter here. So you can do it based on timestamp. There's all sorts of options depending on how your log file spits out its dates, like how they're formatted. In this case, I'm just doing it on new line, so every log message is a new line. So then I have to also add a collection path. So I'm going to copy that collection path, that file folder path. Now I'm also going to type in an *.log, and this is basically saying if you see any files in the Cireson monitoring logs directory that has an *.log extension on the end of it, I want to collect it. So it's not going to grab the PS1 file that was there, but it is going to grab anything with a log extension no matter what. So you can get specific here if you need to, or you can lean on the wildcards a bit. So I'm going to click Add once I have that going, and then click Next, and here's where I give it a name. And you can see that _CL is forced on me there. Cancel, and once it's all configured, you'll see it here. You can click Details and kind of review what we just looked at. So now I'm going to show some Windows event logs. I'm going to click here and see it's actually moved to a new spot. On this new page, there's a variety of things I can add to configure the agent further beyond the custom logs you just saw. So we've got Windows event logs at the top. It's typically your system security logs, event operations manager log, if you're familiar with ITSM and SCOM. So if you want to pull data out of there, you can do it here. There's also some performance counters, some Linux performance counters as well, syslog, IIS, all sorts of options here to grab what you need. So showing an example of grabbing in that operations manager log, I'm going to click on this add event log, and then in the drop down here, I'm going to search for operations manager. Select it, and then probably most importantly, I'm going to unselect the information box. So next, I'm going to click on Windows Performance Counters, and this is where we can look at things like CPU and disk and memory and all sorts of good stuff there. So I'm going to type CPU. I'm going to find one that looks decent here. So usage %, and click Apply. And of course, there are other options. We won't go through all of them today, but lots of options to start collecting different types of log data. Okay, so now we have configured an agent, configured collection rules. Log Analytics has everything it needs to know about what to collect. It knows the servers it's going to collect from, and data has sort of to fly into Azure Log Analytics. It should be fairly quick if you're going through this demo, maybe after the fact, to try to follow along. It takes usually 5 or so minutes. I believe it pulls every couple minutes. The custom logs I've seen take a little bit longer sometimes, but you should start to see that data flow in after a pretty brief period of time. Now, once you have that data in the system, now we can, in your Log Analytics workspace, I should say, that's where we're going to query it and everything. So we'll talk about in a demo coming up, where how to actually do that and get the data out. But you can use something called custo query syntax to query that data and get this. You might collect warning and error data, for example. And so if you needed an alert down the line, or you needed a report that just showed one versus the other, or so forth, you can use this query to kind of go a layer deeper into the data and get a smaller subset. So if custo query syntax makes you roll your eyes as another thing to learn, or that you don't have skill set for in-house, keep in mind that these queries can be exported to other tools like Power BI. So you could do a pretty high level query that just grabs a whole table, basically a whole set of log data, and it's just a couple clicks really to get it into a format that you can put into Power BI. So if you've got in-house skill sets and business analysts perhaps that know Power BI very well, and you want to get this data into their hands so that they can work their magic, it's pretty simple to get there. It's really a couple clicks. You get a text document essentially to plug into Power BI, which points it to this workspace. So pretty simple to get there, and always great when you can reuse those same reporting tools and other tools to create that business value. You want to reuse where you can, just like we want to reuse as much of this solution as we can across other systems. Okay, so in our demo here, we're going to look at a few things. So we're going to create a simple query, nothing too complex, but we're going to look at our collected data in that query. We're going to save that query. Now, not for right now, but for the next demo section, we're going to talk about creating an alert. So we're going to actually make an alert that fires when this query that we make returns a result. And then we're also going to go through that step I just mentioned about how to get data out and into a more familiar tool like Power BI. Okay, back in our log analytics workspace, we're now going to create a simple query with the log data we collected. So click on logs. I can see Cireson logs showing up here. There's also a couple logs related to service desk, and those come from the ITSM connector I've mentioned a few times. We'll see that coming up. Real simple way to get started is just to double click a log file in here, click run, and sure enough, when I do that, I can see all the results that have been collected in a certain time range, 24 hours in this case. I can see some other important metadata here. Lots of good info collected beyond just the raw data. And if I want to save this, I'm going to click save. I'm going to give it a name. And we'll be using this a little bit later on. Category as well, not super important for the demo. So if you want to just, for convenience, pull up a query you use a lot, or if you did want to feed this into something like an alert, that's what that save functionality will help you out with. But shifting gears, we can also export this, and click export at the top right-ish here, and I can go right to Power BI, CSV, some other options there. When I click on this text file, we see all sorts of info in here that, some comments at the top with some instructions, which are pretty helpful to remember how to actually do this. And then just the kind of the syntax of this query. So what workspace are we connecting to? And what's the actual query we're running to get the data out. So this will feed into Power BI so we can get the same set of results you just saw at the bottom of my screen surfaced in a Power BI workspace. Okay, now over in Power BI, with that export copied to your clipboard, we're going to click Get Data, Blank Query. Then we're going to click on Advanced Editor. Now the query here, we're going to just paste in what we exported from our text file. And again, instructions right at the top as a comment if you need to remember how to do this. Kind of handy. Click Done once you've got that all sorted out. And you probably are going to run into problems with credentials, but once you get that sorted out, you've got your exported data right here. It's just in Power BI instead of in Log Analytics. And once that all finishes loading, and again, you might need to mess with username and password to make sure you can authenticate okay. Once you get that all straightened out, your data is here. You can start adding in your pie charts, your bar charts, whatever you need to do. The data source is there. It's, refreshes and so forth with your query. Of course, depending on your Power BI refresh settings, it might be manual or not. But you've got it here. So your Power BI team, your business analysts, they can run with this and they can start to build the reports that they need with this data here and not have to, relearn anything, essentially. Okay, so now we've seen how to set up your server, set up your log analytics workspace with the rules. We've seen how to get the data out or see the data that started to be collected. And now we want to act on that data. So maybe we have acted on the reports, but that's more of a kind of a poll. Every week I need some information. It's not live. It's helpful for sure, but there's another layer here to how we can get value out of the data that we collect. So that's where kind of alerts and action groups come into play. And so when you generate an alert based on a rule, so certain query you make trips an alert. To that alert, you can tie an action group. And in that action group is where you have your options for how to respond. So right off the bat, and the easiest method to deploy is email. It's pretty simple, but can be noisy. So as a starting point, it's a great tool to get this kind of proved out and tested and validated in your environment. But there are some other options as well if you'd like to take it a step further. And so some of those options are the action group gives you 7 or 8 different options for integration with other, or ways to send the alert, I suppose. So there's a handful of automation options. There's Azure Automation, Azure Functions, and Logic apps. So it can kick off a runbook in Azure Automation, for example, passing over some parameters from the alert. So you know what alert, initiated the runbook, for example. This is all very similar if you're not familiar with these automation tools, but you're familiar with tools like Orchestrator or SMA. It's a very similar concept. So Runbook does a piece of business logic, automated PowerShell perhaps worked in there to do whatever you need to do. And so this is no different, just kind of driven more on the Azure side. So you can kick off a piece of automation in that action group. You can also use something called the ITSM connector, and the ITSM connector is kind of a hidden gem almost that Microsoft released a few years back, and it does quite a bit. I find that I'm talking to customers, they're not really aware of it. So something definitely to maybe as a side item in this presentation to dig into and see if your organization wants to take advantage of it. You can think of that ITSM connector kind of like an Exchange connector, I suppose, if you wanted to draw a parallel. It's when an alert is tripped, you can create a work item in Service Manager with a given template. So that's kind of where the Exchange connector parallel comes into play. There's no inbox or anything involved. But once you get this set up, it's really easy to take an alert and surface that to ITSM system. And actually there's one for ServiceNow and for Service Manager. So it depends which system you're using. It's compatible kind of all the way. So that connector can be a very powerful, very easy way to integrate. It can also, data comes back the other way as well, I should mention. So there is actually a dashboard which shows you all the incidents and change requests kind of in the environment created with the connector. And there's a really powerful CI component, configuration item component to the connector, where it will say, let's say you've got 5 computers, 5 servers in your log analytics workspace, and they're all sending data to your log analytics workspace, so forth. And maybe 1 or 2 of them are a little bit noisier than the others. You actually have functionality in that ITSM connector to link. It automatically links to CI in your environment. So you can actually see server 1 has generated 10 alerts today. Server 2 has generated 1, and kind of so forth. So it can help to visualize maybe some troublesome servers that need some help or whatnot. So there are Other things you can do as well. So webhooks really come into play. First thing that comes to mind for webhooks with me anyway is integrating into Teams, into Slack. Just posting a message into a channel can be really helpful for collaboration purposes. A little bit less noisy than email. Can follow the thread a little bit easier. But of course, webhooks can go into really any system. Not any system that supports webhooks. So if you do have a system that can accept one, you have a way right there to connect to that other system. So this is where the integration options really open up. You've got webhooks as kind of your more open-ended tool set, as well as these Azure automation type solutions. Azure automation is one, functions, logic apps, or some other ones. So you can build kind of what you need to respond there. ITSM connector makes it super easy to just make the work item, and you can the value of that is, I mentioned earlier, you really want to get your the things that your staff are working on, you want to get them in your ITSM system to track them. It's super important to get that done. But all this stuff can be combined is the other thing I want to mention. So you can fire off a runbook, you can create a ticket, you can post a webhook. And so just an example of like what that might look like. Let's say you had an alert. You're monitoring something that on premise that said a service was down. You could send that log data to Log Analytics. You could have an Azure Automation Runbook kickoff to try to restart that service. If it fails, post a webhook into Teams or Slack to mention, this failed and someone needs to take a look. And at the same time, you could also create that ticket using the ITSM connector, or you could create a ticket through a runbook as well if you wanted to build that out kind of more custom. So you could do all that at once and have the ticket for tracking, have the solution maybe even automated fully. So lots of options here. Really cool ways to kick off, and nice kind of low barrier to entry, things like email just to get started, and you can really kind of kick it up a notch and start working in these other action types. So on that note, let's take a look. So we're going to actually go through now creating an alert using, remember that saved query we made in the last demo. We're going to create an alert that runs when that query returns results. We're also going to look at an action group and kind of some of the options I just went through, and we'll see some of the results for some of those options. There's, like I said, there's 7 or 8 there, so lots of options here. We'll see some of those in action here. Okay, back in our Log Analytics workspace, we're now going to make an alert that effectively does something with this data. Of course, we've seen how to report on it, but this is more kind of reactive. How are we going to react to data we see here? So I'll start by scrolling kind of down a little bit to the bottom and clicking on alerts. And I'm going to, I have an alert already generated here, but I'm going to click Create New Alert Rule. Now I'm going to add a condition. So the condition is going to be the on-premise error kind of log message we saved earlier, Innovate demo you can see here just below. So we're going to use this kind of as the trigger for this alert rule. So when this query returns results within 24 hours, we have an alert. We've detected a new log message we need to react to. And of course, you'll want to filter this, maybe only make certain log messages, react to certain log messages, to certain errors, certain warnings, and so forth. But you can make that query, save it, and use that to kind of fuel these alerts. And you can also fuel it on a condition. It doesn't have to be in kind of an all or nothing. You could say if the threshold is a certain number of error messages, or aka log messages, then we want to respond and react to this. So there's lots of ability to change that up here a bit. Okay. So I'm going to pick the Innovate demo category I created. I can see at the bottom my query from earlier right in here. It is actually running now and trying to return the results, kind of validate the query and so forth. And then there are a couple options I can set here as well. So number of results greater than 0. In this case, it's if I get any results, I want this alert to trip. And then evaluate at the bottom based on period. So look at this, run this every so minutes, and if you run this less frequently, that keeps the cost down as well. So it's something to keep in mind there. When that finishes, I can click done, and there we go. I have my condition. You can get an estimated monthly cost there. And now we get to action groups, and this is really where all the magic happens, so to speak. We triggered our alert. What are we going to do with it? So I actually have this set up already, kind of more rounded out action group that I'm going to jump to for the sake of time and kind of show you some of the options that are there. So I'm going to go back up in my workspace to Log Analytics Workspace, excuse me, and click on my Managed this time instead. And I'm going to click on this on-prem error example. And so I've got the same condition set up, but I have an action group here as well. So you can see there's a couple items here. We've got our, the very first one is notifications, notification type. I can click on that and see that I have some email, SMS type options here. So I can click the box for email. I can type in an example email address. There, of course, are some other options around SMS. You can have it give you a push notification, voice call, and so forth. In this case, I'm just going to do email, and I'm going to click OK. So then you can give that a name and so forth. The other two options I have in here are for the ITSM connector and an Azure Automation Runbook. Click on the pencil icon to edit. So we have a few options here. First, we have the subscription at the top, the connection to my SCSM environment, type of work item, the template I want to use, which is pretty neat, be able to pull those incident templates. I also have the ability to just do a custom template, specify impact urgency. So I can click OK. And now what I have set up here is it's going to create an incident of that type whenever this alert is triggered. And remember, this alert is triggered when I get results. I get error messages in my logs. Those logs are coming from that Log Analytics agent into my Azure Log Analytics Workspace. Those logs are generated. In this case, it's simulated by a PowerShell script, but those would typically be from some on-premise application that spits out log files. So right then and there, I have kind of my full path, log file to ticket. So over on the SCSM side, in this case, I can actually see the ticket that was created. So right at the top, I have a title, I have a description, and those are, of course, generated. I have some other fields, classification, category, source, impact, urgency. So this stuff is all generated, as a combination of the stuff I've put in the alert there, as well as the template I've chosen for this. We can also see if we scroll down to the bottom, what I think is kind of the killer feature of this is it's actually linked my CI. So the alert that I generated on machine SM01, I never kind of put in that necessarily in that alert this CI, this particular CI object, but because that log file was generated from that machine, the ITSM connector was able to make the association that, hey, you've got the CI, it's linked to this particular incident now. And so you can imagine as you have more and more incidents over time, you can start to see some really rich and interesting information there about, what CIs are causing the most, workload, I suppose, for your analysts. So this particular server maybe has a lot more, volume in terms of incidents than another in the same kind of family of servers. So maybe it's something we should look at, and maybe there's something we can fix with that. Now, the other really, really cool thing here at the bottom is this end user comment. So I actually, I ran that script a few times to generate a few extra alerts. And one key difference with this ITSM connector compared to something like the SCOM connector is I ran it twice, but I didn't get two incidents. I got one incident, and because the second time this ran, it detected there was already an active incident for that particular CI. It just added that new log message as a comment to this ticket. So what we'll often find with SCOM connector implementations is folks will turn on that SCOM connector. They'll get absolutely flooded with tickets from that connector. If it's noisy in SCOM, it's going to be noisy in SCSM. and then they tend not to look back and they turn it off. So in this case, you're not dealing with that extra noise from a bunch of different alerts for the same system. You're getting that data, which is important data to have, especially if there's new types of issues going on with an active CI. But you just see it, so you get the data as a log entry, but you're not getting spammed with tickets. Other quick side note related to the ITSM connector is you do have a dashboard in here which shows you some of the the data that we're interacting with. So we can see total impacted computers, kind of just a high level number for that. We can see all the sync status. We can see the number of work items generated by machine, all the rules, all the alerts we have going. So you can see a kind of a nice high level view here of all the snapshot of your environment, and even take action on this. If a particular computer is super noisy, then here's where we can figure that out and maybe do something about it. Okay, so back in my action group, we've now seen the ITSM connector and what that can do to create an incident. But I want to show another example here. Won't have time to get to all the different options today, like the webhooks and Azure functions and so forth. But this Azure Automation Runbook, it's called Innovate 21 Demo Runbook. It's just kicking it off when this alert fires, same as it created the incident when the alert fired. If I click on Edit, here I see a number of options I can use to configure the runbook. If it's enabled, what's the subscription, parameters. Again, some stuff you're probably pretty used to seeing if you've worked with Azure Automation. But yeah, pretty simple configuration to actually kick off this runbook, but not entirely all configured in here. There's actually some parameters I want to show you outside of here. Hopping back to our alert rule, now this is actually a level up from the action group. We have the ability to do some custom actions in the alert itself. And in this case, we're sending a JSON payload as part of this webhook call over to Azure Automation. So I've actually put some custom JSON in there, like a workspace ID, customer name as an example. And then there's some parameters you can use, like include search results, that'll actually pass over all the different rows and columns that were returned in the query you generated. In the saved query that's powering this alert, it'll actually print out the results of that, so that I can now use kind of set this information, pass that to my runbook, and then do something in that runbook with that added context, which can be super helpful to know which alert this came from, what environment maybe it was based off of, what's the actual error message that was in the alert. Scrolling down to the bottom here, we also have a couple other options. So, once you get a lot of different alerts, it's going to help to start classifying them based on severity. But another really interesting option is the suppress alerts tick box here. And so what this means, again, along the same lines of spam and wanting to reduce noise, error messages tend to spawn other error messages, right? So all we need to know is there's an issue. We don't necessarily need to know there's 55 issues going on for in a couple minutes span. So what the suppress alerts will do is say, if you trip this alert once, don't trip it again for X number of minutes, 20 in this case. So at most, you would get 20 instances of this alert running, one in 20 minutes. So even if we got maybe 5 error messages every minute, and this was running constantly, that means that after an hour, we're going to see, if like on the ITSM connector side of it, for example, we'll see 1 ticket with 2 action log entries. And on the Azure Automation side, we would see 3 distinct runs of this runbook in a 1 hour span. Okay, so now over on the runbook side, we can see that my runbook has run. When I trip this alert, we can see the output. On the output tab, this is just a PowerShell runbook at the end of the day, and it's parsed that webhook data and it's printed it out here for me to see. And in a real world runbook, you do something with this data. But most importantly, here we've parsed those params we sent over from the alert section. So I have my issue description and all the stuff that I might feasibly need to, all the info I might need to go and do something, it's all kind of captured right here. So, okay, so we've now seen kind of the full solution applied to one example. So we got logs from on-premise, taken log analytics, we've reported on the data there, we've alerted on the data there, and in a variety of ways. Right? We've done email, potentially we've done Teams, Slack, ITSM systems, runbooks. So that's all well and good, but you might be saying, well, isn't that just, creating the same, this is another way we've solved the problem here. But the real advantage to what I've shown here today is that this can adapt, this can be reused. You've kind of separated the challenge of integrating two systems, you've separated it with these kind of building blocks. So the challenge is no longer how do we get an alert maybe generated from on-premise system A. How do we do something with that? How do we respond to it? How do we know about it? How do we create a ticket off of it? We're no longer looking at that system and figuring out, well, that system, it has webhook functionality. We can do it that way. It might have API, the ability to make an API call. We can do it that way. We're no longer solving these problems, point A to point B. We're saying, look, the challenge is how do we get that system's log data into your log analytics workspace? Once you solve that, and how you do that is probably going to be very similar to what we saw today. Using that log analytics agent, collecting that data, just slightly different configuration, right? Because log files will be probably at a different path, system to system. So you apply that same concept, you get the data in log analytics. Once it's there, your ability to integrate with other systems and respond to it is the same. It's exactly the same for every other system. Now, it might, exactly is probably a strong word there, but you might need to use a different template, create a different type of incident and service manager. But if you're using the ITSM connector to do that, it's just a different option in the dropdown there. So, slightly different configuration, right? Different people need to be alerted potentially, and maybe automation applies in some cases and not others. But you've got these building blocks. It's simplifying this big challenge of two systems and a wall between them, and it's instead saying, all right, little steps, get the data in one place, react to it, respond to it. So the ability to do this it's very powerful, getting that data all centralized in one spot. Once it's there, you can kind of streamline the way you respond to it. And remember too, like log analytics is where your Azure Monitor data is stored. So you might have cloud systems that are feeding into log analytics workspaces and that you need to react to in a similar way to this. So our solution, again, it's building blocks, but the way we collect can be reused, the way we respond can be reused. And that's really, really, really powerful. You can go and create a ticket, send an alert for something on the Azure side, just the same as you could on the on-premise side. And it's just super important that, the IT landscape is constantly changing. If you think back 3 years ago, even 5 years ago, what you worked on then and what the world looked like then was very, very different. And so we need to be able to constantly adapt and change things. That the solution you build, you're going to have to, adapt it. You're going to have to expand it and apply it to other areas. So can't underscore enough the importance for things like documentation. Even if you know it and understand it now, make sure everything you build here, the why, the how, it's all written down, it's all documented, so that you can kind of go back to that, expand upon it, and reuse these building blocks in other ways in the future. So on that note, that's all I've got for today. Just again, this really neat solution that we've started to take advantage of with some of our customers. So hopefully you can get some value out of it too, or at least a subset of what you've seen here today. Okay, so on that note, that's all I've got. So hopefully, if you've had any questions, you could type them in the chat here as we've been going. I will be in the virtual lounge following the presentation. I'm going to hop over there in just a second, so please find me there. I will be there for the full 30 minutes. Any questions you have typed up or any questions that you think of on the spot, I'll be there to answer those live. And again, we also have a lounge open all day if you'd like to hop in and ask the experts anything else or just say hey. So thanks again for joining me today, everyone, and have a good one.